going to heaven?
In this video we will recreate this shot from the movie The Creator that was just recently in the cinema. And yes, what you saw at the beginning will be our end result that we create together in Blender step by step, so let's get to it. So first I started by adding in a camera. I figured out that 50mm worked the best. I have no idea what it's actually in the film, but yeah, it's just like some guessing work. Then I turned the passepartout to 1, so we don't get distracted by anything. And how I did it, I added some reference. So I had this reference image from the first frame of the shot of the trailer, and then I added in a reference image of the last frame of the shot in the trailer. So I have like the first and the last frame, and then I trimmed it to 120 frames and make sure to have a frame rate of 24. Then for the aspect ratio, I choose 2100 to 900, like the 21:9 aspect ratio. And you can see it's still a little bit stretched, but we will work that out in After Effects at the end. Okay, so let's go to the camera and activate the first frame, and let's add in a plane. This plane will be our water. You can turn it really up to something around 500 and then move it in front of the camera. So the next thing is to add these hills in the back. So for that, add in a plane and scale it to the mountain, and then let's subdivide it a few times. And now with proportional editing, we can just like move out certain parts of it so it looks like the mountain. Then let's also duplicate it for the other mountain, and again just extrude some parts with the proportional editing. Make sure to set them shade smooth and move them a little bit down in place. So now you can see the mountains in the back are not as smooth, so let's add a displacement modifier with a clouds texture, which you can set to 0.1 and the strength also to 0.1. Let's also do the same thing on the other hill, and now it looks way better. Okay, so now we have the most important stuff of the landscape, so let's put the reference image in front, and let's turn down the opacity so we can match it. And now we just match the horizon and the hill exactly with the camera. And also let's make sure that our camera isn't like 10 meters in the air, because they probably filmed it for real handheld, so it's probably like 150 or 160 or 180 meters in the air. So let's also move the camera down and match the horizon again. So now we will create the beach. For that, add in another plane and subdivide it a bunch, and then move it like right in front of the camera. Select the beach, move it down a bit. Of course, also name all your meshes. Then go into edit mode, and let's turn our image back down again so we can see what we do. And let's just drag up some parts of it with the proportional editing. And now we can see it just like gets separated from the water, and we can create this beach line. And let's just try to match it as closely to the original as possible. Okay, and with that, next up is like this wave you can see here. It's like in front the water is smoother, and in the back it's more wavy, and it's like separated with this bigger wave coming in. So let's add in another plane. Let's scale it on the y-axis, and let's add a displacement modifier with another cloud texture. Let's also subdivide it so we can actually see the plane is affected, and then let's add in another displacement modifier with a little bit of a smaller displacement clouds, and also scale a bit more in the x-axis to make it a little bit more wider again, and let's move it in place. And these are the final values that worked best for me. And for the height, just move it that it like just some parts of it go through the water. So next, let's add in another water plane. This is like the stiller front of the water, and just move it in place, move it a little bit up so it's over the water in the background, and it should end right there where our bigger wave is, so we have like a clean separation. Then I also noticed this small little detail, which is really small, but it helps to separate the water from the sky. So let's just copy one of the hills, move the top even a little bit more up, and let's move it in place. Okay, so now we have like the basic landscape. So next, let's get to the character. For the character, I just used this Mixama model you can see here with a simple walking animation. And if you don't have Adobe for Mixama, you can just like use any model of a person, maybe that looks similar like a soldier and walks forward. Then I also added in this gun from Kitbash Cargo, but you can also find some free models. And what I did is I added a child of constraint to the gun and parented it to the right hand bones so it moves with the soldier. Then I also added in a quick flashlight, which is just a simple cylinder with an emission on the front, and it looks really stupid, but from the distance it works. And for the actual light of the flashlight, I added in spotlight, and I parented the spotlight and the flashlight to the gun. So now everything moves with the soldier, which is great. Next up, I just duplicated the soldiers and offsetted the animation so they don't look like clones. You can see it in the keyframes. And then I just went to the first frame and matched the position. I also paid attention how deep are they in the water. And yeah, with that I just had my soldiers, and then I went to the last frame and added the last frame as reference. And then I just moved the camera in place, and you can see now the camera goes forward, which probably isn't really realistic, but it works for the final shot. And yes, I also did the same with the soldier, went to the last frame, also moved them in place. So I had like the soldiers that were walking slowly forward. So yes, this turned out great. And for the camera animation, I also added a slight camera shake. I used the Shakify add-on from Ian Hubert. By the way, check out my last video where I showed you all the add-ons I use. Shakify is also one of them, so make sure to check that out. You can see it in the top right corner. And yes, with that I just added a slight camera shake to give it a little bit more realism. Then I also animated this wave a little bit. For that I just added in an empty. And then I changed the coordinates from global to object and selected the empty, and now if you move the empty, the waves move. So I just added some keyframes to the empty, so now my wave moves a little bit, which just adds a little bit of an extra detail. So we will get to this big laser beam you've probably been waiting for just in a bit, but first let's check out the really basic and easy texture work I did. For that, let's change to the shading space and go to material preview, and let's start with the hill in the back. It's basically just a principal material with the roughness all the way up and some bluish color. Then for the beach in the front, I added some sand texture, but honestly it doesn't really matter, because in the end, if you check the original, it's because of the compression and because it's so dark, it just have to be like some sand color. And I also added this weird, I use this weird technique to add some small stones. I just had this plane which was displaced, and I just moved some parts of it up that it clips through the ground, which looks like small little stones. So yes, you can also do that manually. It was just the way I did it. And then for the water, so this is also a principal texture, a pretty simple setup with the transmission to 1 and the roughness to 0. And then with the bump node, I added a noise texture to give it some normal displacement. And I also changed it to 4D, so I could animate this a little bit, but be cautious with that because it can look weird if you animate it too much. For the backwater, I did the same thing, but I put the bump a little bit more up, and then I combined two noise textures. One is the smaller one for the foreground, and one is some bigger noise displacement you can see here in the background, and then I combined them. By the way, just ignore these for now, we'll get to that just in a few moments. Okay, now if you go to render view, it all works perfectly together. And also a big part of that is the HDRI. I believe I used this one, which is free from Polyhaven. And yes, then I used Easy HDRI, also an add-on I mentioned in my last video, and I gave it a little bit of a tilt so I have the nice clouds where I want them, and I also tinted it bluish and turned the gamma a bit up so it looks just like in the reference. Okay, now we're at the point where we can add in the laser. So for this part, the video would be way too long and kind of boring if I would show it exactly how I did it, but you can download the laser file right now from Gumroad for free. You can find the link in the description, it's the first link. So if you want to use that, or if you want to see exactly how I made it, make sure to download it yourself. And play around with it, and I don't know if it's like the best or most efficient version, but yeah, it just worked for me. But essentially it's just like 3 planes I added in, which like are similar to the one you see in the reference, and then I just mixed some transparent and emission textures and masked them and added some details with some noise textures, and then I also animated it. And another cool thing is the few nodes I showed before on the water surface, which like add the laser on the ground. And the cool thing if you do it like that is if like your ground is displaced, the laser still like interacts with the ground, which is great. It's just a really easy like 2 or 3 nodes geometry node setup. But yeah, check out the file. You can download it for free on my Gumroad, first link in the description. Oh yes, something I nearly forgot is below the water surface I just added in a cube. I switched the viewport to wired, and I also gave it a principal volume texture and set the density to 1, and this just simulates this real water, because if you can see, if I turn it off, it looks kind of funny because you can see through it really well, and it also gives it like these realistic like light rays, but just underwater or on the water surface, which looks great and is also similar to the reference. So yes, with that we can render it out and we're ready to do some post-processing in After Effects. In After Effects I first of all imported the reference video from the trailer, so I have like an accurate reference for the grading and everything. When I imported footage, because I couldn't find the right like aspect ratio that was in the original in Blender, I just de-stretched it here a bit. You can see it if I turn on the reference. I just like scaled it just on the Z axis a little bit down to something like this, and then it looked pretty similar. Then I added a Gaussian blur, turned to 5 to just give it like this, like the lower quality and unsharpness from the original video. Then I also added some grain to emulate like it was filmed with a real camera, and the most important part, the lumetri color effect. Here I just changed the tint and the temperature a bit, and I also played with the contrast and the shadow. And then probably the most important part under creative, I just pulled everything into the bluish color like it's in the reference. I also added a vignette effect to it because that also helps it to sell the look of the original. And with that we were already finished. So before you click away, it's also important to me to mention like we could have made this way more accurate, like if we spend hours to change the water texture to make it more realistic or other things. Like you could spend so much time on this, but I just wanted to try to achieve the best result for not too much time spent. So yes, here you go. I hope you could learn something, and make sure to like the video if you liked it and dislike it if you don't. And also check out my Patreon. You can join for free there and get free assets and updates on stuff. And if you want to support me, you can also join a paid tier, and you even get a 7-day free trial, so make sure to check it out. The link is also in the description. With that, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to comment and subscribe, and I see you soon. Goodbye.